Hello, my name is James Rhodes, and I'm the LGBT Diversity Chair here at Weber State. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day, or at least the best day we can have. And this is my presentation, Strike a Pose, an exploration of ball culture through time. So to understand ball culture, we have to first understand what a ball is. So this is a queer gathering, and throughout this presentation, we're going to kind of use queer as an umbrella term for a lot of diverse LGBT people. But just know that it is not necessarily denotating anyone's specific identification, but that it is just kind of an umbrella term. This is a runway structure, so you can think of like these high fashion events that you've kind of seen before, but these are competitions. There's a judge table that will hand out scores to the performers who will dance and walk down a runway. There are categories that you'll walk in, and we'll kind of get more specific into that later. But this is a way for a lot of these people to self-express, to wear what they feel most comfortable and what they feel beautiful in, and receive adoration from the large crowds that these would carry. And this is a big community event, so there are lots of people from lots of different backgrounds coming to this. That being said, we make the note that it is still the 1980s because there are still racial issues that go along with this. White balls would be held, and black attendees or anyone of color showing up would be told that they would need to dress or wear whiter makeup to be able to win these fashion shows because they just were deemed and seen as not pretty enough. And this backlash led them to create their own balls. And that is where the community really, really became big, was in these minority people coming together to create their own balls. So now that we have kind of a rough idea of what a ball looks like, we can go into a lot more detail of some of these specifics of a ball, as well as the greater environment in which these events were occurring. So these started to take hold in the 1980s in New York as a part of their nightlife. These were primarily attended by poorer communities that were kind of looked down upon, both for their race as well as their identification in the LGBT community. This was still times during the AIDS epidemic, so there are still a lot of prejudices that go along with being an LGBT person, as well as still a lot of racial issues in this larger city. These communities were built around these events that we've kind of talked about, and they were primarily African and Latin American communities that are bringing together these events. So now that we have an understanding of the greater cultural environment around these events, we can kind of go into what specifically happens at these events. So a drag performance is something that is very, very common here. Drag is not something exclusive to balls, but it is intrinsically linked to it and is another queer art form. A drag performance is exaggerating features of both the masculine or the feminine, and they can come together and be very, very diverse. So there's a lot of ways that you can do this, but it is kind of hyper-feminization or hyper-masculinity in a very traditional sense, but that can be very messy, and drag can be defined many, many different ways. Drag queens are something that people are probably more familiar with, and that is usually a man dressed as a hyper-feminine woman. But drag queens, or drag kings, also exist and are very talented, and this goes along with makeup, dress, wigs, and an embodiment of a character. And we do make the important distinction here, though, that drag is not being the same as being transgender. Transgender is an identity that you hold with yourself, whereas drag is an art form. So it is more something that you do for fun, whereas gender identity is something that is much more serious and much more real for a lot of people. And we have images here of RuPaul, who some of you might know. She's very, very famous nowadays, and did get her start in these scenes. And then there's also Divine, who is on the left, and some of you might know her. She is the inspiration for Ursula from The Little Mermaid. Disney's Ursula, I should say. But so she was designed off of that. But these would be very common in these balls, both ways, drag queens and drag kings. That being said, these events were also very fluid with gender. And so trans people would also feel very, very comfortable here wearing what clothes they felt most comfortable in. And again, that is different than being a drag performer. But balls really gave them a place to be able to walk and feel comfortable in whatever clothes that you felt best in. You wanted to look beautiful in whatever that looked like. So along with the elaborate dress that was born here, there's also a new dance form that we see come out of ball culture, which is voguing. And I think this is something that if you're going to know anything from this presentation, this is probably something that you've heard before. But this is born of kind of an act of conflict. So we'll talk about a little bit later how some of these people would come together and they don't all necessarily like each other, but that voguing was kind of this peaceful way to get out a lot of this anger that you might feel for other people. So this is very exaggerated, strong movements. It is kind of gymnastic. There's lots of flips and just things that most people are not capable of. Posing is also very strong here because we have to remember that they are walking a runway. So throughout dancing, you still have to be moving. You have to be getting through this. There are elements of breakdancing. There's talent that is performed on the floor, and levels are very important here. You can be high in the sky on the tips of your toes, as well as like rolling around on the ground and doing amazing tricks that I don't think I can do justice to verbally. So definitely, if you get the opportunity to watch anyone who is a very, very talented at voguing, it is amazing. They can do things with their body that I think most people can't. And this was very much practiced at these events, but this is not something that you will just pick up in 20 minutes. So it lived on the streets. These people would go home to whatever that looked like, and in many cases that was a park bench or like no home at all, just sleeping somewhere in the streets. But people would practice and dance with each other outside of these balls to really get good so that they could perform when these events did come around. And we'll talk about this idea of a portal into the mainstream a little bit later, but it kind of goes along with the fact that many of you are probably more familiar with this than anything else here, and it's that this was something that the larger majority culture did latch onto. Once it kind of got bigger, greater white heterosexual culture.
Voguing came from shade because it was a dance that two people did because they didn't like each other. Instead of fighting, you would dance it out on the dance floor, and whoever did the better moves was throwing the best shade, basically.
No touching, neither one of you. If you touch, I'm chopping you. I'm telling you right now.
You could take the pantomime form of the Vogue. This is what generally sometimes I do, is I make my hand into a form like a compact or makeup kit, and I'm like beating my face with blush, shadows, or whatever to the music. Then usually I'll turn the compact around to face that person, meaning like almost like my hand is a mirror for them to get a look. Then I'll start doing their face, because what they have on their face right now needs a dramatic makeup job. So voguing is like a safe form of throwing shade.
Paris, 2 free. Work. Paris, 2 free. Work. Woo! What right this with you? Don't knock off this Paris. Come on, baby, take your time. Bring it to the judges. Judges, get into the form and the style. Work. Let's hear it for her,
The name was taken from the magazine Vogue, because some of the movements of the dance are also the same as the poses inside the magazine. The name is a statement in itself. I mean, you really wouldn't go to a ball to do the Mademoiselle. No way.
New York on the floor. New York and Jersey. Wake up. Come on. All right. Dennis Baker on. Make it on. Jason Albany. Bobby LeVay.
Don't practice it. I know how to do that.
Like breakdancing, the dance takes from the hieroglyphics of ancient Egypt. It also takes from some forms of gymnastics. They both strive for perfect lines in the body, awkward positions, but it goes one step further. It's starting to make a name for itself, but I want it to be known worldwide, and I want to be on top of it when it hits. I want to take voguing not to just Paris is burning, but I want to take it to the real Paris and make the real Paris burn. That's what I want to do, and not just there, but to other countries as well. My house name is Ninja, and I would really like to take my whole house and go to Japan and really let loose and do it and have them accept it there. I want to be a big star. Known generally every corner of the world. Voguing came from Shay.
So all of the performers that you watched in that last clip were at balls, so that kind of gives you this idea of what all of that looks like. But let's get into categories. So these are groups that they would section off for different performers, and these are some of examples. So there would be like executive realness, so you would dress like an executive. You can kind of see that in the photo in the bottom right, and we'll go into that in a second. Legendary mothers, so these would be people that would be deemed mothers because they would own a house, which we'll talk about, and they would dress to impress. Butch queen, first time in drag, so these are people that would share very masculine traits. In the top right, this is the start of a butch queen first time in drag, and this performer decided to rip off their wig, just kind of to denotate this like very masculine aesthetic that they're going for. Dynasty and banshee is another one. Banshee is kind of a fun slang word. It kind of means like very street. So you would think of this would kind of look like hoodlum or just much more like layman's clothes that you would see walking down the streets. But to go a little more into executive realness, this was really important because at this time, many racial minorities as well as members of the LGBT community would not be allowed into a lot of professional jobs. They, just based on the interview, they wouldn't even let them apply. They would ask them to leave. So executive realness really gave these people a chance to say, look, I can dress like you. I can look just as nice as you, if not better. Walk like you, talk like you. The only reason that I don't have this job is not because of anything I'm doing, it's because of your prejudice. And this was a chance for them to kind of embody these fantasies that they couldn't live because of the greater cultural environment that they existed in. So this was a really powerful event for these people to be able to kind of, like we've talked about, self-express and live out these dreams that are being smashed not by the fact that they don't want to work hard enough or that they can't achieve them, but certainly by the greater cultural environment around them. So to delve a little deeper into these ideas, this is a form of minority expression. In the greater cultural environment that they live in, the mass media here is not marketing towards people of color or members of the LGBT community. When they turn on the TV, it is filled with the white Huggies baby, the white mom buying her makeup, the white man's suit. So there's nothing that is really marketed to these communities, and they don't really get to see anyone embodying success. So these events were kind of a way to highlight and acknowledge the excellence in their own community. In these events, you can win trophies. So after they've scored everyone in a particular category, the person with the highest score will receive an award, and this is kind of a way for them to appreciate this excellence that they can embody and show both to themselves and the people around them that though they might not be able to hold these positions, they are worth it and they matter. These were in very poor and impoverished communities, and as a result, these events are held really late at night. Even we think of like bar culture and stuff like that as a very late night event, but these would be held even a little bit later because the working girls, as a polite term for sex workers, they didn't have a home. A lot of these people didn't have a place to live or another way to make income, and so that was the only way that they could pay to be able to eat. And it was not enough money that they were living in some beautiful apartment, especially not in New York. Everything's so expensive. But really, they were doing this work not because they loved it or anything like that, but because it was their only way of making food. But they did love these events. And a lot of these performers would go from that job straight to these events. So they held them much later at night so that these people could make a living and, be able to at least get something in their stomachs for the night, but still have a little bit of fun and perform. So we touched on the idea of a mother a little bit earlier, and we're kind of going to delve into that here. So what is a house? Houses were groups of people that came together they would live together and they would perform together in these balls. They were considered kind of a gay street gang, which I really like that terminology, both because I think it's kind of funny and it is very representative of the community that is built around these houses. So they would all share the same last name, and these were usually picked, so they were something dramatic and kind of auditorily pleasing. But there's a mother or father of these houses, and those would usually be the most important, the most powerful person there. And that's not necessarily like fiscally powerful, but just an attitude. These were people that really embodied, the strengths and what it took to be really great at a ball. And so usually these are people that are winning lots of trophies. They would start a house. But what's really, really interesting about this is many of the people attending these balls don't have a home. They don't have somewhere to sleep, and they don't have food to eat on the table. So these are really, really poor and impoverished communities. But these houses would come together not only to walk the runway and to win trophies, but to really support each other. And a lot of these mothers and fathers would really treat these people like their own children, because we have to remember that at this time, being LGBT, being anywhere in the queer community or on that spectrum, was not accepted by many households. And still to this day, we have people who are kicked out of their houses and are left homeless as a result of coming out. But back then, it was even more prominent. So a lot of these people were thrown out on the streets, and these mothers and fathers really became the only family that they had, not because they were blood, but because they just had genuine compassion for a lot of these people. And I write here that they're kind of the unsung heroes bringing people off the streets, and I think that we don't really learn a lot about this community, but so many of these people were the only people putting effort into these poor and impoverished communities, because on a larger scale, the larger white heterosexual majority really didn't care what was happening to a lot of these LGBT populations, as well as the racial minorities. The AIDS epidemic really kind of embodies this, in that people would see that the gay people were getting sick with this disease, and obviously there were straight people as well, but they didn't really think about that. But that no action was taken because they kind of just had this perception that it was like nature sorting it out. They were like, oh, well, we don't care about these people, so if they're going to die on the streets, like who really cares? So very little action was taken until white heterosexual communities became largely affected by this illness. And I think that kind of embodies the greater perception of these communities and the lack of caring there. And so I think that there is something very beautiful about the idea of these houses, that these are really just people that are kind of thrown out on the street, all banding together to create the family structure that supports so many of us today in their own lives, and taking care of each other. So I think that that's a very beautiful and important concept that we can glean from studying ball culture. Okay, so we've talked about how this is kind of an underground community, and that there is not a lot of large media coverage of these events because they're kind of hidden and they're attended by people who aren't necessarily fiscally wealthy enough to draw large crowds that aren't just other people who are indulging in this event. But voguing and drag both kind of were thrust into the mainstream in the early 90s to the 2000s, because a lot of white mass media finally discovered that this was kind of a cool thing, that these were talented folks. I would say voguing became more popular because you could separate it from these identities, because it is just kind of a visual art form that anyone can do, and there's no real countering to this cis heteronormative culture that we see with drag. But voguing became really, really popular, both in just seeing people on the streets. At some point, everybody else kind of caught on to this idea that these people are doing really cool, talented things. The Stonewall riots, which hopefully you've at least heard of once in your life, but were a group of riots that happened because a lot of LGBT establishments, so gay bars and drag bars and things like that, were being harassed by cops. They would just show up and harass people and be awful to them. And at some point, people decided, no, we've had enough. And so the Stonewall riots were basically LGBT people standing up to the police and saying, you know what, eat it. We're going to exist and you're going to deal with it because we're not doing anything that's hurting anybody. We're just being ourselves. So it was a very, very big moment for the LGBT community, but it also allowed for a lot of the discussion around LGBT rights to be opened up. So we see kind of as a result of that LGBT events are being held. There were some great events being held for AIDS research, and these were led by primarily queer people and featured vogueing, and these were media covered, and so vogueing became something that now you could watch on your TV at home, and that a large community could see, and that really brought light to this idea, as well as we'll talk about here in a second, that there were both performers such as Madonna, who released her song Vogue. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it was very, very popular, as well as these movies like Paris is Burning, which are coming out and talking about ball culture. So no longer is this community something that basically is hidden in the dark in these clubs late at night, but it is something that the rest of the community at large, and the larger cultural existence is getting to see. So it is absolutely wonderful to see that these LGBT and minority events are being seen on a greater scale and being brought to the larger population. But that being said, there were some things that were lost in this. And I think for the statement that many of you probably have never heard of ball culture is one of these ideas, that this inherently Black representation and LGBT identities were kind of torn away from a lot of the things that hit the mainstream. When voguing became super popular, a lot of the roots that came from these people that were just trying to make do and have fun with, despite their struggles, were really not highlighted in any of this, and were really not given any platform to speak in a lot of senses after kind of its beginnings in these like events of AIDS organizations and stuff like that. Voguing has kind of lost its identity as a purely queer art form, and balls, I think, have kind of been pushed still into the underground, despite that there was this moment and that the larger cultural sphere still enjoys a lot of things that have come out of this group. These art forms were created specifically for these communities and were not something that necessarily they themselves marketed to the rest of the world, but it was almost kind of stolen from them, and now no one in this community really gets to reap any rewards from it. And so I think that is inherently something that is a little sad to see, despite the fact that it is great to watch this art form grow in size and become something that is available for everyone. So continuing on, discussing some of the things that were lost or damaging about this thrush into the mainstream, the exploitation of LGBT people is kind of an issue that a lot of people talk about. Madonna, with her wonderful song Vogue, obviously had to learn how to dance for her music videos and for the performances. And so great, she brought in LGBT queer minority people to teach her these performances. But a lot of people's problems then come in the fact that these people were maybe paid a couple $100s, which maybe feeds them for a month or two. And Madonna went forward to become, gaining thousands and thousands of dollars off of this art form that is not necessarily hers. She may have marketed it to the masses, but that she didn't necessarily come up with it. And that a lot of the people who actually taught her to perform then went on to starve in the streets because they couldn't afford food. So that is definitely one of the issues that people have. As well, Paris is Burning is a wonderful movie that I keep mentioning, and it really is enjoyable and fun to watch. But the white male director of that film went on to win a Sundance Award and make many, many dollars off of this movie. It's now on Netflix. So he lived very comfortably as a result of this movie, and the people that were in this movie, it's a documentary, so literally no one except the people in this community are shown in it. They then go on to, again, live on the streets and live on a park bench for the rest of their life, while some other man lives his happy little life on his white ivory tower because he pulled out a camera and filmed them. So it brings up this great idea that these art forms are made for the people who perform them, and that it is wonderful to be inclusionary, and it is great for everybody else to kind of get to enjoy something so beautiful and talented, but that we do kind of have a responsibility that we can't just take this art form and say, you created something amazing, and then just leave them out in the cold. That there is something that feels kind of dirty about that. And so I definitely think that that is a discussion that we need to have more openly in the future, that we can't just take the beauty out of something and then not acknowledge the people that may be exploiting in some way. And now we move on into the future. So balls are still occurring today. What does the scene look like now? RuPaul's Drag Race, which maybe some of you have seen. I mean, it is pretty popular, so I don't feel crazy assuming that some of you know what that is. But it's a TV show that is very, very large and has spin-offs of the series that go on in different countries, has kind of really brought drag into the forefront of mass media. So it is something that many more people are aware of. So I think that has helped to kind of move away from this taboo idea, and it has made balls able to be attended by a lot more people. A new category that has kind of spun up, which I think is really cool, is the category of NB, which is short for non-binary. So a lot of the categories that we saw, like executive realness, were kind of marketed towards a specific sex, or masculine or feminine. They were very divisive in that sense. And so you couldn't necessarily perform executive realness and look like a woman in an executive sphere, because it kind of went against what their vision of that art form was. But moving forward, we've kind of broken down this idea of this very binary image of gender and said, no, you can have a beard and false eyelashes, and that is something beautiful. So this category of NB has kind of come out of that community, in that you don't necessarily have to dress in a very binary sense, that this is just an expressive art form and you can really wear anything. As well, we're kind of seeing these gender barriers these racial barriers being broken down. So no longer do we have these really, really white balls that are very exclusive to our racial minorities, or these underground African American, Latin American balls that are very low attended by white people. But we are seeing something that is mixed of a lot of LGBT people, as well as a variety of different ethnic backgrounds. And obviously we know America is a very, very diverse country, and so it is wonderful to see that reflected in these balls, and that we're moving towards a more progressive standpoint. This is also much less underground. You don't have to kind of hide from the police or anything like that. A lot of these communities are less so being marginalized. Obviously, we have still many steps to this day to be taken, but we're moving towards progressiveness. And so these events don't have to be held as in secret as they once were. Houses are still very, very much popular. There are now hundreds and hundreds of houses all across the country. So where this was born in New York and, just happened in a few small communities, it branched out into adjacent states, so Philadelphia, all around there, and continued to grow until now we can look and see that there are examples of this all throughout the country. So this is a much more national thing, and balls happen everywhere and houses happen everywhere now. So this community has continued to grow as a result of the passion and love that goes into this. And it's not something that died out in the night, but it's still performed today. And to kind of round out our presentation, I know that I'm kind of giving a fast and rough overview of everything that goes on here, but these are some great resources that are a little bit more fun. This isn't like reading text or anything, but these are all on Netflix, so if you want to watch them. Pose is a TV show that I'm currently watching. I haven't finished. It's a little explicit, so I will warn you there. All three of these are a little bit explicit, so if that's not something you're looking for, then maybe shy away. But Pose is a wonderful TV show that has recently come out that kind of talks and highlights ball culture. Paris is Burning is a documentary which we've kind of discussed isn't necessarily the most it's a very accurate representation of this community, but it may have done some not so wonderful things to some of the people involved. But it really does do a great job in its film of being very progressive and discussing these issues in a very educated way, and letting these people really speak for themselves and speak to the community at large. And then Strike a Pose is actually specifically about the dancers that taught Madonna, and it kind of goes in depth there, talking about the people and how they were affected by Madonna's influence in their life, but all very much highlight some of these great ideas behind ball culture. And I think Pose is very visually stunning and very enjoyable. Paris is Burning is very funny. I caught myself laughing plenty within it. Like, they're all entertaining to watch. So if you have a minute in your quarantine experience, I definitely think all of them are worth giving a chance. I know for me, I binged them all in one day because quarantine is only gently maddening, but I hope everyone else is having an absolutely wonderful quarantine experience, or at least as great as you can. But I think this kind of rounds out my presentation. I want to thank you all so much for listening to me, and I hope that you have an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. But yeah, thank you so much.